joined now by Tuesday regular from the Province and Post Media, Mr. Patrick Johnston with Sekeres and Price. How are you? Happy Canada Day. Hope you enjoyed your long weekend.
Yes, I had a good time. Happy Independence Day, all that. Yeah, lovely long weekend. The Canucks, obviously, free agency day continuing to be on Canada Day is what it is.
With no social media. Yes.
It was that too. It was weird. I mean, definitely weird getting back on that routine because we obviously haven't had free agency day on Canada Day since before the pandemic started, if I'm not mistaken. So,
did you like the weekday draft, but not the weekend free agency? Like, I want it all on the weekdays. Shouldn't that it's all business? Shouldn't it all be on weekdays?
Yeah. I mean, I'm of the opinion that why are we doing? I mean, I get it's always been like this, but why are we doing free agency on a national holiday? Wouldn't you want to make it a standalone media event on a Tuesday or something?
As we know, the National Hockey League likes to avoid
entirety of people's attention, which you don't get.
I don't really get it, but anyway,
Canada.
I mean the draft, the midweek draft. It feels like a work day, so that was fine. I work Tuesday to Saturdays basically anyway, so
I know,
Saturday,
so do we, but feels like everybody's involved when it's on a weekday. It
was fine. It was fine. It was fine. And there is ended up making it like that 4-day run. That part I can understand. I can fully understand. So, but why don't you do draft Tuesday, Wednesday, and free agency on Friday or something?
Boom.
Like that? But
there you go.
Busy, and Canucks. I think, as everyone said, they were careful, and all these moves essentially make sense. But in a division that is very competitive. This merely keeps you with the pack and doesn't. There's no separate. You're not.
Is that our conclusion, guys?
Yeah.
Is that our conclusion? This is just barely keeping up with the Joneses. Yeah. This isn't getting ahead.
And that's assuming that all the superstars play just as well as they did last year, which is a big ask.
I think that's where you could quote unquote get ahead. Is if Pearson has another huge year, Hughes is even better, and Demko gets back to himself the full season. Then but then again, you're moving off of, as is always the case, you're moving off a pretty low bar. So everything looks impressive when the bar has been set so low over the last decade.
So I suppose we'll put you down for a no on the Bodog poll question. After a weekend of free agency, were you impressed with what the Canucks did, or are you still impressed despite just keeping up with the Joneses?
I'm hesitant to say impressed. I mean, it's like I said, they didn't sign any fourth liners to 4-year deals. There was no rationale from the GM saying, well, the fourth year was what it was going to take to get that contract signed.
PJ, that was my answer. I'm impressed they didn't hamstring themselves. That was my impressiveness. Yeah.
Yeah, they didn't, and obviously connected. There was some noise about JT Compher. They didn't end up signing him to a 5-year deal for $5 million, which I think would have been a bad choice. So I guess that's impressed. Some restraint.
Yeah, low bar.
Compher and Rodriguez, who got 4 years. I think Patrick Alvin's Canada Day looked better as the weekend went along, and you saw some of these contracts coming on in. Did they miss out on anyone? Was there a free agent out there, or maybe still out there if you're a fan of Pius Suter?
You
look at and go, that was good money. That was a good deal. Would have liked that guy at that ticket.
Yeah. Nothing jumped off at me. I mean, I think they still need to find a third-line center. Teddy Blueger is a handy fourth-line checking center. Patrick Alvin said, I think he can score 15 goals. I mean, that was the one thing I would say was like, oh, boy, we've heard this story before.
He had 4 last year, if I'm not mistaken. His career high is...
They've been asking for 15 goals out of Teddy Blueger for years in Pittsburgh.
Hasn't it?
Yeah. So, yeah.
Remember when Brandon Sutter was scoring 30 here, Patrick?
Well, exactly. And we've heard this story before, and Teddy Blueger is a fine pickup. I think, he's obviously an upgrade over Niels Alman. I will be honest, I gave Teddy Blueger a Selke 5th place vote a few seasons ago. I've always been impressed with the guy as a defensive, penalty killing type guy. A guy who you put on the ice while your stars are resting to not hurt your team, and he's pretty good at that. But I have no stretch of the imagination sitting here thinking this is a third line center. Yeah, I fun. Also, another Latvian. Canucks have had a lot of Latvians in their time. Another Latvian.
It's actually Teddy's Bluegers, and I'm not even joking.
No,
it is plural.
Yes,
Yeah.
he's dropped the S's.
Yeah. I know.
He's
Teddy
anglicized.
Bluegers. Yeah. Anyway, I think there's still. I mean, we'll see. They're now back over the cap, so they've got to figure that out. And of course, the Pearson question is out there, and the Pullman. I mean, we talked to Alvin, and he talked very upbeat and positively about Pearson, and we'll see. We'll see. Like the guy hasn't handled a puck since I don't know. To be honest, I still don't know if he actually touched the puck when I was there in Vegas in November. But he was on the ice, looking very happy, and before this all went wrong. So, they're obviously optimistic on him. Of course, that is a real wrench in the works because there's another winger. But Pullman, I think they're pretty much banking on not being here in the fall, given Alvin was, I asked him, he said, well, I'm less certain about that one. I feel bad. I can't remember what the exact phrasing was, but very clear that they are not expecting. They're certainly not counting. I mean, they have assembled a roster that clearly does not have Pullman as a factor. So there's a bit of breathing room, I guess you could go LTIR with.
Where are you on the Carson Soucy impact? Is this a fifth defenseman? Is this a fourth defenseman? And where are you slotting him? What's the expectation?
I mean, realistically, look at where he played in Winnipeg, right? He was a third pairing guy in Winnipeg. He played his role very well. Same in Seattle. Hard edge guy. Does a lot of things really well. As someone said to me, the one question mark will be he is a guy that takes sort of, aggressive, sometimes careless penalties. Will that wear quickly on Canucks fans? I'm not sure. I think the fact he is a physical presence, they talked about the reach and all that kind of stuff, which was, I think, was interesting in comparison to Tyler Myers, because I don't think we've ever considered Tyler Myers as being terribly effective at using his reach. But yeah, clearly a player. I mean, they obviously want him to play further up the lineup. Whether that's a long-term option, I don't know. Ethan Bear, of course, remains an interesting question in all this, because they definitely think that he could play. Ethan Bear, if they were to sign him, they definitely think he can play higher up the lineup. But yeah, I mean, Soucy adds, and he's a dependable NHL defenseman. And they didn't overcommit to him. I think a 3-year deal for a player of his age, he's turning 29. You're paying him to be that player till he's 31. Most players are still perfectly fine till they're 31. It's what happens after that becomes the problem. I think in the end he is a player that will be a good player for the Vancouver Canucks.
Especially if Filip Hronek's good. Before we move on for this pairing, I mean, Filip Hronek needs to be exactly what he's been advertised as. And I'm a little bit skeptical because I knew who Filip Hronek was before they acquired him, but he wasn't like a household name. Like if he's a top 2 defenseman on a team, like why wasn't Filip Hronek more known NHL wide?
Yeah, and I wrote about this a little bit last month when we were doing our sort of review under the microscope reviews. You look at his numbers in Detroit, and in many ways, obviously the offensive talent was there. He's having a really good year. He's not going to play on the power play like he did, but defensively, sort of at best, you can say he didn't hurt the team any worse. The Detroit was not a very good defensive team. That's not because of Filip Hronek. I think that's clear. But you look at sort of the relative numbers when he's on and off the ice. The team was not as good as they were with him on the ice, but they were hardly earth-shattering. It was not a night and day situation when he was on the ice.
Yeah.
So, I'm not saying the numbers say that he was no worse than any of his peers. There were definitely peers that were worse than him.
I'm just saying how good he is certainly debatable.
Well, that's
right?
what I mean. And that's what I mean. On a not very good team defensively, he works hard. Everybody talked about how hard he hit in practice when he finally came back on the ice. Clearly works hard, does a lot of things, but not a player where you're saying, oh my goodness, this guy should be a number 1 or a number 2 on another team, on a better team.
Yeah.
If anything, he would be lower down the lineup on a better team. So we'll see. The Canucks do fancy themselves as having been better than the Red Wings were last year. And now they're betting that he can be essentially a bigger contributor because of the way their lineup is set up and because of the coaches and yada, yada, yada. But at the end of the day, I think you're exactly right. He's a guy that, he's a perfectly fine, pretty solid NHL defenseman. And that's nothing to sniff at. But I don't think he's a guy that's going to be, oh my goodness, it's Quinn Hughes' like long lost brother.
Yeah.
Or anything like that.
Now Dewey
we know
and
where
Cole.
his brothers are.
Now
Yeah,
Dewey,
exactly.
now Dewey and Cole.
Yeah, 1-year deal. I think everyone's kind of said it. Like this is in terms of looking for a player. I was surprised, to be perfectly honest, to see a 34-year-old defenseman that had been as successful. Obviously, Tampa is a fantastic place to play, but has been pretty consistent. He's played on some very good teams, and he's been a good fit on some very good teams. So that is a good sign, right? Like, you don't. Jalen Chatfield, we can debate whether he would be any good on a different team. He had a great year in Carolina, but was that about the system? Obviously, because he was very, in the end, he didn't do anything here. The system wasn't very good, so that didn't help him. But Ian Cole clearly is a guy that has been a good player on some very good teams and still remains a viable commodity. And so from a playing standpoint, yeah, I think he is going to help this team. Obviously, the penalty kill was so obviously a point of focus for this team. And that was my question to him when we talked to him on Zoom on Saturday. I said, tell me about being a penalty killer. And he had a very sort of long, insightful answer that I thought was very good and led me to say, hey, are you going to be a coach when you retire, obviously? And he goes, actually, it's kind of interesting. And, he's a guy that's thought about the game very clearly. He understands the game. He's got a cerebral approach to the game. I think from that standpoint that it makes sense. And we know the player is known well to management from honestly, long ago. Mm-hmm. But I think it was, in terms of playing ability, he seems like a pretty good fit.
They didn't get the big winger they were searching for. I guess they ran out of cap space. But they were very quiet on the trade market throughout all of this.
Yeah.
Patrick, we didn't hear them pursuing anybody. Dreger tells us that Philly pushed Travis Sanheim on them.
Yeah.
And they resisted. And that also goes with their own players. Sounds like at the end of the day, they absolutely weren't going to trade J.G. Miller this time around, despite the business with Pittsburgh at the deadline. And I just don't think Podkolzin, Höglander, Rathbone, and some of the bid parts added up to much on the trade market. But maybe you tell me.
Well, I think Rathbone's also, he's the kind of guy that I wouldn't be surprised if there's a trade at the end of training camp. That's as teams finally shake out their rosters and they're sort of going, oh, okay. Maybe a team takes a stab at him on waivers at the beginning of the year. He did. Let's be fair. Like, let's be honest. He did struggle as an NHL defenseman. There were things in his game that stood out to the team as well, in terms of the quickness he reads the play, the confidence that he plays the game with, or lack thereof at the NHL level. The struggles he did have in the AHL initially. Obviously, he had a pretty good finish to the year, but a guy that I think we've all agreed has certainly been leapt over by Akito Hirose, just because he is the new thing and they want to see what he's about. I think they feel like they have a pretty decent book on where Rathbone is at the moment. And the fact that obviously he's scored goals and he's got his nose for them. He scored. He has shown offensively to have some smarts in the NHL. And maybe he is a guy that's just going to have to kind of work his way, and he turns into a Brad Hunt type or something like that. A guy that was a smaller defenseman who has to really figure out sort of how to make it all work and will live on as a seventh, 8th defenseman.
You still want another Chatfield scenario, though, where you toss Rathbone, all of a sudden he's eating 17 minutes a game somewhere.
Absolutely, yeah. No, you're right, and I think he probably deserves a chance to kind of be seen by this new coaching staff, work a little bit with his new coaching staff. But I do get the sense, just having sort of talked to them over the season, that there are some serious questions. I think that we've all seen that they've obviously seen them. There are some questions about his sort of ability to sort of read and react and deal with, breakouts and that kind of thing that I think they now need to, if he is here in camp, get some preseason games, that maybe will tell the tale there. But yeah, we'll see. It's interesting. I had people saying, Connor Garland didn't like it here, or was, would have been fine moving on. I've had someone suggest, actually, no, he's a big brick. Like, Tocchet loves him. Tocchet missed him from Phoenix. He was a big Tocchet guy in Phoenix. So maybe there's a change there. But in the end, there's, like I mentioned with Pearson, like, there's a lot of wingers here. And, you've got to think something's going to change. I mean, maybe they're just going into training camp saying we need some safety blankets in terms of potential injuries. You always want to have more players than you need, more NHLers than you need. You sort of figure out when you have to, and I could also see that happening. We just go into training camp with this large roster, and then they make some decisions at the end of training camp.
Well, as soon as I say they're not much on the trade market, Grady Sass gets in my ear and goes, ask him about Kevin Labanc in San Jose and whether or not there's a Tyler Myers deal there. What did you make of the business last week that Myers and the Sharks could be involved in a deal with Vancouver?
I think from what I've gathered, I think it is a sense of there's a fit if there's a bunch of other items that happen. And not that it's going to happen, but certainly it's been an option that they've laid out. If this, that, if a
Carlson trade,
something like that, like there's a few items that have to happen. Yeah. So that's kind of where I'm at. I mean, Kevin Labanc. I mean, we all remember when he got that incredible value contract and then turned around and didn't have a great year.
Yeah. Not the biggest of body either. Doesn't play center or penalties much.
Doesn't instinctually look to me like he's never scored 20 goals.
Sounds very Connor Garlandy.
Connor Garlandy.
Yeah.
I didn't even know. I don't even know. He had that one good year. He's been a handy player lately, not on a very good team. He doesn't strike me as, oh my goodness, this guy, he's had a solid NHL career. He's been, a solid middle six winger. But nothing about him screams, this is a player that is going to move the meter in any direction.
Right.
We'll see. I think I look at Myers, and I think if you're moving Myers out, I mean, obviously there's a cap element to this, obviously, but he's only got 1 year left. So how is his value? Like we talked about the possibility of making that deal with Chicago, which obviously didn't happen. There was some logic. I always thought there was a bit of logic in making that one work for him, but.
Yeah, and the other thing here is you don't trade a right-shot defenseman on an expiring contract for a winger on an expiring contract when you have more wingers and you aren't quite sure about your defense. We are fresh out of time, and you got to get to development camp. So thank you for this. And we'll talk prospects in development camp and off-season leftovers tidbits next week.
Absolutely, boys.
Thanks, BJ.
Thank you. Tackle all the hills with ease and don't arrive at work all sweaty. Get around the city on electric transportation that fits your lifestyle and get it at bestbuy.ca.